the so-called underwear bomber. And the series of events that happened between Nidal Hasan and the Fort Hood massacre and the underwear bomber sealed Anwar al-Awlaki's fate. The day after Nidal Hasan conducted that massacre, Anwar al-Awlaki wrote a blog post that said Nidal Hasan is a hero. And he said that he called on other Muslims in the US military to do exactly what Nidal Hasan did. That was the last blog post he would write. The CIA had his blog shut down. Then the underwear bomber, the attempted underwear bombing happens, and Anwar al-Awlaki says in an interview that Umar Farouk was one of his students and that he knew him, but he said, I didn't direct that operation, but I support that operation. And the person that interviewed him was this journalist named Abdullah Haider. And he did, and if you read it, he was a young Yemeni journalist. If you read it, it was a almost scathingly critical interview with Anwar al-Awlaki. This journalist says to him, "You support blowing up a civilian airliner? You know, those are people that are innocent civilians." And al-Awlaki is sort of pushed into a corner by this journalist, and he's saying, well, it would be better if it was a military aircraft, but it's asymmetric war, and the US is killing our civilians. And he sort of tried to rationalize it in this interview. So I bring up this journalist for a reason. So this journalist is interviewing Anwar al-Awlaki. He's interviewing other members of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And he also traveled to the scene of the first US bombing that happened in Yemen under the Obama administration. So there's a lot on the table right here. Al-Awlaki, there's smoke around him. There's the Nidal Hasan thing, there's the underwear bomber. We know that the US wants to kill Anwar al-Awlaki. In the midst of all of this, the Obama administration initiates an actual bombing campaign in Yemen. On December 17, 2009, the US does a Tomahawk cruise missile strike on this small Bedouin village of Al-Majla in Abyan province. And what they believe they were hitting was an Al-Qaeda training camp. And when this bombing happened, the Yemeni government put out a press release saying Yemeni air forces attacked an Al-Qaeda camp and killed 34 members of Al-Qaeda and destroyed this training camp. And then the US put out a statement praising Yemen's government and congratulating them for this successful operation against a terrorist training camp. Because this journalist, Abdullah Haider, went to that village, which no one probably ever thought anyone would want to go to. It's in the middle of nowhere, Mountains,ville, Yemen. He goes there, and he takes pictures of the missile parts. And it showed clearly that they were Tomahawk cruise missiles, and Yemen does not have Tomahawk cruise missiles. It also showed clearly that there were cluster bombs, which are like flying landmines and are banned under international conventions. Yemen doesn't have cluster bombs. And he sent those pictures to Amnesty International and other human rights organizations and began reporting on the fact that the United States was bombing Yemen and that the Yemeni government was claiming responsibility for the strikes. And his reports went all over the world. And Amnesty International had munitions experts look at the pictures and determine that in fact they were the cruise missiles and the cluster bombs. And they had it right down to who the manufacturer was of these particular weapons. So he's on TV, on Al Jazeera. His pieces were picked up at ABC News, the Washington Post, and NBC News. He's interviewing Anwar al-Awlaki. He's interviewing heads of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And he's becoming a very well-known journalist and is stringing for major US news organizations. And then one day, he is out shopping with his friend, a political cartoonist, and they're going into a store, and he is snatched off the streets, this journalist, and taken to the political security organization's headquarters, which is the secret police in Yemen, and is beaten bloody. And they tell him, if you don't stop talking about the missile attacks here, if you don't stop that, we're going to put you back in here for good. And they kept him for 24 hours, and then they dumped him back onto the road. And he did what I think a good journalist would do in that case. He went straight to Al Jazeera, and he said, I was just abducted by Yemen's secret police, I was beaten, and they threatened me. They told me to stop talking about the American bombing of Al-Majla. And part of the reason why the Al-Majla bombing struck such a chord with him and so many Yemenis is that it was not an Al-Qaeda training camp.